Ethan, approaching the precipice of 27 and still unattached, found himself in the crosshairs of his mother's matrimonial ambitions. He had come out to his parents years ago, and their acceptance had quickly morphed into a relentless campaign to find him a boyfriend. His work, a whirlwind of cross-country flights and sterile hotel rooms, left no time for the curated awkwardness of blind dates. In response, his mother, a woman of formidable resolve, had enrolled him in every conceivable high-end matchmaking service, ensuring that no matter the city, the opportunity for a romantic setup was merely a phone call away. She had paid for the platinum tier. This meant Ethan had a dedicated concierge at each service, a relentlessly cheerful professional whose job it was to circumvent his client's evasiveness. They changed their numbers weekly to avoid being blocked. At this point, for every 3 calls that buzzed his phone, 2 were from a matchmaker eager to pitch him the latest curated selection of bachelors. He was weary of it, but his mother's one rule was that he couldn't just hang up. He had to log at least 60 minutes of engagement per week. "You need to understand the market, honey. See if you're still a hot commodity," she chirped. "All that handsome packaging, and you can't even land one man." He had to admit she had a point. Felt like a personal failing. He was in the lobby of a Chicago hotel, waiting for the front desk to sort out his reservation, when his phone rang again. A saccharine voice introduced itself as being from Echelon Connect. The representative noted that their system showed he was in the Windy City and, what a coincidence, there was an exclusive 10-person mixer scheduled for the following evening. Did he have time to attend? He gave a cold, simple no. The representative's enthusiasm was undeterred. She informed him that his preference was noted, but perhaps he'd like to hear about the attendees in case he changed his mind. As she launched into a litany of eligible men, a wealth manager, 31, with a master's from Wharton, a ruggedly handsome entrepreneur from a humble background, Ethan's mind began to numb. His weekly call quota was still unmet. The list of men blurred into a hypnotic, frustrating drone. On a sudden, chaotic impulse, he cut her off. "I'm sorry, I'm seeing someone." The representative, well-versed in this particular deflection, barely paused. She asked what this person was like. The service needed data points, she explained, to better refine his profile for the future. Ethan's gaze lifted from the marble floor. Through the hotel's revolving doors strode a procession of men in dark suits, led by one who seemed to bend the room's opulent decor to his will. His features were stark and chiseled, his presence so commanding that the glittering chandeliers suddenly seemed gaudy and dull. Ethan took a quick, assessing glance and began to fabricate, feeding the details to the woman on the phone. He described a tall man, at least 6'2", who favored charcoal gray suits. He mentioned a strong, straight nose and a profile so sharp it could cut glass. The representative tried to counter, mentioning that their platform had many men who fit that description, all with exceptional financial portfolios. Ethan fell silent for a beat, then decided to commit to the fantasy. He informed her his boyfriend was the CEO of a publicly traded company, a man so important he traveled with no fewer than 10 bodyguards. Across the lobby, Julian heard the tail end of this audacious claim. It was a strange coincidence. His own security detail, discreetly blended into his entourage, numbered exactly 10. He glanced over, his curiosity piqued. He saw only a man with his head bent over his phone, revealing a pale, elegant nape. Julian raised a single eyebrow before moving on. Ethan, meanwhile, grinned as he watched the call timer tick past 62 minutes. He took a screenshot and texted it to his mother with a simple "done." He knew the matchmaking service wouldn't inform her that he'd claimed to have a partner. He was too valuable a client, a reliable source of recurring revenue. A few days later, A new representative called, feigning ignorance and offering the same services. "I have a boyfriend," Ethan stated flatly. This time, he decided the man was a doctor. A cardiothoracic surgeon, very handsome, with 3 condos downtown and a sprawling villa in the suburbs. The representative asked if he was sure he didn't want to keep his options open. Ethan replied that he was quite busy, as he now had 3 boyfriends and was struggling to juggle them all. By a staggering coincidence, Julian was passing by again, this time in the elevator bank of a different hotel in a different city. His memory was exceptional, and he was surprised to hear that the impressive CEO had been replaced by a surgeon. Then he heard the rest. The man was a serial cheater. As Ethan stepped into the elevator, lost in his conversation, he failed to notice the weighty, contemplative gaze that followed him. The elevator doors slid shut, and with a long, groaning sound, the car shuddered to a halt between floors. Julian calmly pressed the emergency call button while Ethan, after a brief flash of gratitude, seized the opportunity to continue his phone call and fulfill his weekly matchmaking quota. For the next 30 minutes, as they waited for maintenance, Julian was treated to an elaborate and entirely one-sided conversation in which Ethan boasted to a supposed friend about his newest paramour. When his imagination began to fail him, Ethan's eyes fell upon Julian's formidable back. He proceeded to describe in exhaustive detail the man's physical appearance, spinning a 3,000-word epic of tailored suits and confident posture. The description sounded disturbingly familiar to Julian. After a few moments of silence, the matchmaker on the other end of Ethan's line, a new one, designated Tiger, asked if he and the surgeon had broken up. Ethan frowned, having already forgotten the specifics of that particular fabrication. He confirmed that they had. The reason? The surgeon wasn't wealthy enough. His new man, though unemployed, came from a family that owned mines. He had, in fact, just offered to give Ethan an entire mine as an engagement gift. Julian couldn't have imagined it, but over the next 6 months, he witnessed this scenario a dozen more times. Ethan's Rolodex of fictional boyfriends was vast, spanning from hedge fund titans and concert pianists to university professors. They were scattered across the country, a phantom army of lovers. The only constants seemed to be their height, their appearance, and their taste in clothes, all of which bore an uncanny resemblance to Julian himself. Of course, Julian had no way of knowing that Ethan was simply using the memory of their first encounter as a template for every lie he spun. He would glance at Ethan and concede that the man certainly had the looks to attract such a crowd. But it was a beautiful shell hiding a rotten core. The man was more of a player than any of Julian's most cynical business acquaintances. The frequency of their encounters was too high to be mere chance. In any other situation, Julian, a man ever on guard, would have suspected a motive, some clumsy attempt to get his attention, like a plot from a cheap romance novel. But Ethan seemed utterly oblivious to his existence, which ruled him out. Given Julian's own disciplined, almost ascetic view of relationships, he knew with certainty that he would never, under any circumstances, become entangled with someone so profoundly promiscuous. After Ethan had invented his 108th boyfriend, his mother finally lost her patience. She declared that his time for online dalliances was over. He was to return home immediately for a proper, in-person blind date. Her resolve was bolstered by a timely opportunity. A dear friend of Ethan's father, an old Marine buddy, was celebrating his 70th birthday and had invited his comrades for a reunion. This friend had a grandson, handsome, successful, and, as Ethan's mother had discreetly ascertained, also single and interested in men. A dinner was arranged. Julian, who held his grandfather in the highest esteem, agreed to the arrangement without protest. The man his grandfather and his friend described was beautiful, polite, and endearingly innocent, having never even been in a serious relationship. Julian, trusting the source, accepted this portrait. And so, at the restaurant, when the private dining room door opened, Julian looked up to see a familiar face walk in. It was Ethan. He was indeed beautiful, but the part about never having been in a relationship, Julian mentally scoffed. Ethan's memory for faces was poor. He didn't place Julian at all, but he immediately sensed a current of animosity from the handsome stranger across the table. He concluded that this man must also be a victim of a forced setup, a fellow soldier in the trenches of familial expectation. A sudden feeling of kinship washed over him. He offered Julian a brilliant, conspiratorial smile, the kind one shares with a lifelong comrade. The warmth of it was so potent that even Julian, armored in his cynicism, felt an involuntary tightening in his fist. A blind date, he thought grimly. The perfect way to be saddled with someone else's baggage. But then, no one in the business world would ever dare mistake Julian for an easy mark. He could strip a man down to the bone and not blink. He fixed Ethan with a deep gaze, a silent message. Back off now, before you regret it. Ethan, completely misreading the signal, met his intense stare with one of his own, his eyes flashing with camaraderie. I know. You're being forced into this too. Julian's grandfather, a kind-faced man, turned to Ethan. So, are you seeing anyone special? Hearing the long-forgotten childhood nickname, a wave of heat rushed to Ethan's face. No, he mumbled. Never have. When Ethan was a toddler, he was so small and delicate that his mother had worried he had a growth defect. For his 4th birthday, Julian's family had thrown a lavish party at their Hamptons estate, and Ethan had been brought along. Halfway through the event, he vanished. A frantic search ensued, with security guards fanning out across the grounds. Julian, at 4, was fascinated by birds. His grandfather had gifted him an enormous, custom-built birdcage, over 5 feet tall. It was painted ivory white, lined with soft velvet, and looked like something from a dream. During the party, for the grand reveal, Julian pulled back the silk curtain draped over the cage, expecting to see a magnificent eagle. Instead, there sat Ethan. The small boy was gripping the bars, his face pressed against them, his dark eyes wide and curious. He looked at Julian and lisped, "Brother, up." He'd crawled inside, thinking it was a fairy tale pumpkin carriage, and couldn't get out. The guests gasped. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Was this how the ultra-rich operated? A child bride, delivered at the age of 4, and caged no less. Julian felt the heat of their stares, wanting to shout that it wasn't his idea. Ethan's mother rushed forward, laughing nervously and extracting her son, explaining it was all a misunderstanding. The story, however, had stuck. The tale of Julian's caged bride became an embarrassing piece of high society lore that had complicated his dating life for years. Both men had long forgotten the incident. Now, Julian watched coolly as Ethan played the part of the blushing virgin, his ears faintly pink. He had to admit the performance was convincing, but he wasn't one to expose people's secrets. Although he wondered, why was he observing him in such detail if he had no interest? Julian's grandfather, noticing his grandson's gaze fixed on Ethan, smiled knowingly. Well, our Julian isn't seeing anyone either, he announced. You boys are both traveling so much, why don't you become friends? Look out for each other. The implication was clear. This was a setup. Ethan glanced at Julian with a look of profound sympathy. Another poor soul being pushed into marriage. Of course, he agreed readily, believing he was doing Julian a favor. By showing a willingness to connect, he reasoned, he could spare Julian from further matchmaking attempts from his grandfather. I'm doing a good deed, he thought, shooting Julian a look over his glass of water, a flicker of mischief in his eyes. You can thank me later, buddy. Julian, misinterpreting the look as a taunt about his own inexperience, felt his expression darken. Ethan hadn't anticipated that his good deed would come with a follow-up. The two families, seeing their slow progress, decided to press the accelerator. A coordinated campaign of feigned illnesses and emotional blackmail ensued, forcing the two men into a manufactured courtship. They reluctantly agreed to try dating. The moment they consented, their parents produced a fully itemized 5-day itinerary for the upcoming Christmas holiday. Julian pulled up in his car to pick Ethan up. They just had to endure these 5 days, and then they could go their separate ways. Ethan, not recognizing the vehicle, was on the phone, taking one last call from Echelon Connect. The service was running a holiday promotion, unaware they were about to lose a major client. Thinking of the freedom that lay ahead, of using Julian as a shield against any future matchmaking, Ethan was in high spirits, even feeling chatty with the representative. Happy holidays, he chirped. I have a boyfriend now, thank you. You remember my first ex, the CEO? Well, I've decided I prefer men with money and culture. No, we didn't get back together. I'm not one to reread a book. This is a new CEO. Please, forget about me. Seriously, it's not going to work out. The representative, desperate not to lose the account, made a final push. Based on their data from the past year, his relationships lasted about a week on average. Shouldn't they keep some top-tier options on standby for him? Ethan scoffed. Let me be blunt. With all my ex-boyfriends, do you really think I need your service to find backups? They are my backups. Their contact information? Absolutely not, Ethan said, feigning indignation. If you set them up on dates, they wouldn't be my backups anymore, would they? He hung up, pleased with himself. From inside the soundproof car, Julian quietly watched his supposed boyfriend commit emotional infidelity with a roster of imaginary men. The winter air was crisp. Ethan, in a pale yellow down jacket and a cream-colored scarf, looked bright and lovely, the very picture of springtime promise. An image, Julian thought, that would be greatly improved if the car's windows were a little less soundproof. When Ethan finished his call, he turned and saw Julian, whose expression was unreadable. Assuming he was annoyed at having to wait, Ethan offered a quick apology. Julian's voice was measured. While this is a pretense, we have a contract of sorts. For the sake of our families, I would prefer if there were no unsavory rumors. Ethan's eyes crinkled into a smile. You're the only one for me, he promised, the sweet words slipping out with an ease that Julian found chilling. This, he concluded, was how the man juggled a dozen partners at once. He didn't believe a word of it. For the next 5 days, every time Ethan's phone rang for a work call, Julian felt another phantom green shoot sprout on his head. Ethan's work was demanding, and his phone buzzed constantly with calls from friends and colleagues across the country. Because he was terrible with names, he had a habit of adding descriptive notes to his contacts, a system that, to an outside observer, looked exactly like a player's cheat sheet for keeping track of his many lovers. Julian kept reminding himself of the facts, of Ethan's legion of boyfriends. But the more he did, the more it felt like a desperate attempt to convince himself of something he wished wasn't true. Julian knew he had a possessive nature. A relationship with someone like Ethan would be nothing but pain. It was better to let each other go. This was a civilized society. They were adults. Their grandfathers were friends. He didn't want things to end badly. Ethan, for his part, remained blissfully unaware of Julian's internal turmoil. He figured that even if the dates were fake, the holiday shouldn't be wasted. They wandered through a brightly lit street market, the air thick with the scent of roasted nuts and hot cider. Ethan ate with gusto, buying one of everything and always getting a second for Julian. He took photos with his phone, documenting their date with the enthusiasm of a teenager in the throes of first love. He looked down at the pictures. Should I email you a set? A stray piece of red confetti, caught on the wind, landed on the back of Ethan's collar. Julian's gaze fixed on the exposed sliver of pale skin. He reached out, his fingers brushing against Ethan's neck as he plucked the confetti away. The cold touch made Ethan flinch. "Do you want them or not?" he asked, oblivious. He'd taken dozens of shots from different angles. These photos, doled out one by one to his mother, would buy him a year of freedom from matchmaking. Ethan tilted his head back, and Julian's fingers, meant only to remove a piece of paper, found themselves in prolonged contact with warm, smooth skin. It took a conscious effort for Julian to pull his hand away. "No, thank you," he said, his voice tight. "You'll be heading back to work soon. Travel safely." Ethan watched him walk away, a little confused and feeling a slight sting on his neck. He wondered if he'd imagined it, but he could have sworn Julian had just squeezed the back of his neck, like one might scruff a kitten. Julian walked away, his fingers tingling. That's it, he told himself. This was the last time he would indulge this. Everyone has their own way of living. Forcing someone to change was both painful and selfish. The risk-to-reward ratio of a relationship with Ethan was untenable. He wasn't indispensable. It was time to get out. For the next year, they maintained the facade of a relationship for their families but had almost no contact. Ethan was initially a little disappointed. He thought they might have at least become friends, but work quickly consumed his thoughts. Fate, however, had a twisted sense of humor. The following year, Julian's grandfather insisted that he bring Ethan to the company's annual holiday gala. They had been dating for a year, after all. It was time to make a public appearance. They devised a plan. Ethan, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, would appear at the entrance, pose for a photo with Julian to be sent to the grandfathers, and then retreat to a quiet side room to play games on his phone for the rest of the night. Julian gave a brief speech at the gala, but his mind kept replaying the image of Ethan at the door, the crisp shirt, the vest, the perfectly knotted tie. It was wrong to leave a guest sequestered away for the entire evening. He selected a bottle of wine and went to find him. The side room was warm, and Ethan's face was flushed. He saw Julian enter and immediately put his phone away. "Hey, shouldn't you be out there?" Julian loosened his tie. "My part is over." What followed felt like a support group meeting for successful bachelors. Tanzal bi Hunda Shongdi. The wine flowed freely. They drank until they were both flushed and laughing, and then, in a haze of warmth and blurred intentions, they ended up in bed. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a throbbing headache and a deeply bruised sense of dignity. He scrambled into the bathroom and frantically called his best friend. "Leo, I'm screwed," he whispered. "He's gonna make me take responsibility, isn't he?" "Wait, you topped Julian?" Leo asked, shocked. "No, of course not." "Then what are you responsible for?" "It was his first time." Leo snorted. "So was yours." "That's different," Ethan insisted. It was obvious that a man like Julian would place a much higher value on his virtue than he did. The man was constantly, if subtly, lecturing him about promiscuity. A man who judged others so harshly must hold himself to an even more impossible standard. In the bedroom, Julian lay in bed, listening to every single word. So, it was true. His expectations for Ethan's character should never have been raised. He pressed his fingers to his temples. Last night was a chaotic mistake, but it had happened. When Ethan emerged from the bathroom, Julian looked at him, his expression unyielding. person should be responsible for their actions. If they can't be, perhaps their guardians should be notified. He's gonna tell my parents, Ethan thought with a surge of guilt. This was serious. He had to take responsibility. Though they had now established a relationship, the circumstances were so bizarre that it felt less like a whirlwind romance and more like a settled, domestic arrangement. They dressed in silence, and then each left for their respective offices. Ethan, walking with a pronounced stiffness, went to find Leo to complain. Leo, a man of the world, listened to Ethan's tale of woe and cut to the heart of the matter. "You're just here for my porn collection, aren't you?" He looked his friend over. Ethan had always been beautiful, almost delicate, a heartbreaker since kindergarten who could get anything he wanted with a sweet smile. But when it came to certain things, there was a clear wall. Leo smirked. "Did a pig chew on your mouth? Those dimples are so red they look like misplaced blush. And the back of your neck? Did he treat you like a cat all night?" Ethan shot him a glare. "Are you giving them to me or not?" Both he and Julian were novices. They desperately needed an education, especially Julian, whose enthusiasm far outstripped his technique. Ethan's backside ached at the memory. He felt a sudden pang of magnanimity. Julian was such a straight-laced guy. He'd probably get a virus on his computer just trying to download a single file. It was better for Ethan, the worldly one, to handle this delicate matter. He left Leo's apartment with a USB drive containing 180 gigabytes of educational material and promptly had it messengered to Julian's office. "Hey," he said over the phone later. "I sent you something. You should sign for it." Julian, expecting a thoughtful lunch delivery, was so surprised he went down to the lobby to retrieve it himself. He found a small package containing a few USB drives. Assuming they contained confidential business files, he plugged one into his laptop. A moment later, his face turned to stone. "He thinks my technique is bad?" The thought of Ethan's 108 ex-boyfriends flooded his mind, drowning him in a sea of retroactive jealousy. The idea that Ethan was a seasoned veteran was now cemented in his mind. He even began to wonder if Ethan kept some kind of performance leaderboard, and if he, Julian, had ranked so poorly as to require remedial coursework. On the 37th floor, in the silent, expansive office of the CEO, Julian spent the afternoon methodically studying the videos, analyzing them with the same grim focus he applied to quarterly earnings reports. He was determined to erase the memory of every other man from Ethan's mind. That evening, however, Ethan called to tell him he had to go on a last-minute business trip. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice genuinely regretful. "I know we just got together, but we're not teenagers. We don't have to be overly sentimental about it." "And the USB drives?" Julian asked, his voice neutral. He was curious just how wide-ranging Ethan's tastes were. Ethan's face burned. "Couldn't they just let this be an unspoken thing? I looked them over. They seem fine," he stammered, lying to save face. He quickly made an excuse and hung up. That night, a new post appeared on a popular online forum. Poster: "My partner has had 108 boyfriends in 2 years and keeps all their numbers. He once told me he considers them his backups. We slept together for the first time after getting drunk, and the next day he left on a business trip. What does this mean?" Reply 1: "Dude, you fell for a wild horse. Your head is now a meadow." Reply 2: "You really think it's a business trip?" Reply 3: "Tolerate, intimidate, or terminate." Reply 4: "Simps get nothing." Julian closed the browser, his heart heavy. His suspicions weren't just paranoia. He immediately had his assistant book him a flight to the same city Ethan was in. According to Ethan's own phone confessions, he had ex-boyfriends scattered across the entire country. Leaving him alone was like leaving a lamb surrounded by wolves. The next morning, as Ethan stepped out of his hotel, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. Julian was behind the wheel. "Where are you headed? I'll give you a ride." Ethan was stunned. "Are you here on business too?" "Yes," Julian lied, unwilling to admit he was there to stand guard. "Get in." Being in a city on business was routine for Ethan, but the feeling of having someone there waiting for him was entirely new. A warm, misty feeling bloomed in his chest. This, perhaps, was the allure of love. He knew, with sudden certainty, that Julian was here for him. He felt a pang of regret for his abrupt departure. He got in the car. "The art museum, please. Right at the next light." He needed to finish his work quickly so he could spend the evening with Julian. Julian's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He recalled one of Ethan's more colorful stories. A cardiac surgeon who got into a fight with a fitness trainer over him, only to have the trainer break his leg. An artist, a witness to the brawl, had a heart attack from the shock. The injured doctor, driven by his oath, set his own broken leg aside to save the artist. The fitness trainer, moved by this display, then fell for the doctor. The details about the artist matched the man Ethan was meeting today. It was a rival. He was glad he'd come. "You came here specifically for me, didn't you?" Ethan asked, a playful smile touching his lips. Julian, startled that his possessiveness was so transparent, quickly composed his features. "No, I have a meeting here." He remembered the advice from the forum. Tolerate, intimidate, or terminate. He was in the tolerance phase. The rest of the day, however, Julian's attentiveness was anything but tolerant. Everywhere Ethan went, he could feel Julian's eyes on him. A steady, grounding presence that was both thrilling and comforting. Upon his return, Ethan requested fewer business trips from his company. He started picking Julian up from work, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction in his new role as a devoted partner. He would wait in the car, not wanting to cause a scene inside the office. Julian always came down within 5 minutes of his arrival. One day, while waiting, Ethan used the restroom in Julian's office building and overheard a piece of gossip. 2 women were talking about a department head, Melissa, who had been trying to ask Julian out for years and was just rejected again. "I heard something juicier," one of them whispered. "They say the boss has a child bride." "A what?" the other gasped. "Seriously. Got him when he was 7. The grandfather delivered him in a cage." Ethan's mind reeled. A child bride? And he was still going on blind dates? His first instinct was to call his mother. When she didn't answer, he drove straight to his parents' house. "Mom," he said, breathless, "I heard something today. Does Julian have a child bride?" His mother, who was in the middle of applying a face mask, had to physically restrain herself from laughing. "Yes, I know about that, hold on." Her vague confirmation sent a jolt of pain through Ethan. "You all knew?" He choked out, his eyes stinging. Before his mother could explain, he fled to his room and buried his face in his pillow, not hearing her call out, "Son, wait. That person is you." His mother retrieved an old photo album and pulled her distraught son out from under the covers. "Look at this." Ethan, his vision blurred with tears, glanced at the photo. "You even kept a picture. Who is this little girl?" "Julian, you monster." His mother slapped him gently on the back of the head. "That's you. You idiot." Ethan's tears stopped instantly. He stared at the photo. It was him, dressed in a frilly outfit, sitting inside a giant, ivory-white birdcage. His mother's laughter filled the room as she recounted the whole embarrassing story. So, he was the reason for Julian's years of romantic misfortune? He wanted to burn the evidence. Lately, Julian had noticed a distinct change in Ethan's behavior. He was overly attentive, almost placating, like a guilty man trying to appease his partner after an affair. They were sitting on the sofa one evening, a mindless soap opera playing on the TV. The heroine on the screen shrieked at her boyfriend, "You liar! You never broke up with your ex-girlfriends. I dare you to delete their numbers." The man on screen sneered, "Fine. Since you know there's nothing left to say, let's break up." Ethan chuckled. Well, he gave up pretty easily. Julian, thinking of the long list of contacts in Ethan's phone, asked casually, "What would you do in that situation?" Ethan leaned his head on Julian's shoulder. "I guess I'd have to break up with him immediately. You'd have to be pretty shameless to try and talk your way out of that." The matchmaking service still called periodically to check in, which was their coded way of asking if Ethan was single again. It was starting to annoy him. "Do you honestly believe," he asked the representative one day, "that with my history, I would need your service to find a backup?" He decided to go on the offensive. "You keep harassing me, and I'll have my boyfriend pay you a visit. He's the jealous type, graduated from a sports academy. And I've got another one who's connected to the mob. But the one who loves me most is a corporate CEO. One word from me, and he'll buy your company just to fire you. So let's just part ways amicably, okay?" The representative was silent for a long time before finally agreeing that this would be their last call. Outside the door, Julian stood cloaked in a dark aura. A jock? A mobster? He was only one of three. He knew Ethan wasn't physically seeing other men. They were together constantly. But this mental infidelity was unacceptable. His possessiveness, fed by love and jealousy, began to curdle into something darker. Ethan remained oblivious, only noticing that Julian was becoming more and more relentless in bed, as if trying to brand him, to possess him from the inside out. "You're a tyrant," he'd protest weakly. But his one-man rebellion was always swiftly and thoroughly crushed. As the holidays approached again, Ethan marveled at how much had changed in a year. Last Christmas, they were faking a relationship. This year, they were intimately acquainted with every inch of Julian's apartment. His only complaint was Julian's plan to use his vacation time to take Ethan on a trip. A 24-hour, uninterrupted trip together could only mean one thing. In an act of self-preservation, Ethan decided to give his own body a vacation. He packed a large suitcase and announced to Julian that he had to go on a month-long business trip. Julian, though suspicious, simply said, "You are not to ignore my calls." The intensity in his voice made Ethan's knees weak. "Okay," he promised. "Anytime you call, I'll pick up on the first ring." He smiled, his dimples appearing like twin apostrophes of mischief. Julian's gaze lingered on them, and before Ethan could escape, he was pulled into a fierce kiss that left his lips bruised and swollen. He hurried out, calling his friend. "Leo, I'm heading out of town for a bit, but I've got a few days free after. Want to go skiing?" He had cleverly extended his 25-day work trip into a 30-day personal escape. "Wow, Julian's finally letting you off the leash?" Leo teased. 25 days later, Ethan and Leo met at a ski resort in Aspen. As payback for the teasing, Ethan tackled him in the snow. "I swear," Leo grumbled, pinning him down, "I am never going on vacation with a guy in a relationship again. I'm a golden bachelor, and this is what I get." At that exact moment, a camera shutter clicked. The photo was instantly sent to Julian's computer. The sender was Melissa, the colleague who had been pursuing Julian for 5 years. She'd been furious when Julian had introduced Ethan as his boyfriend, and now, seeing what she believed to be proof of an affair, she had immediately sent it to him. Julian, who believed Ethan was in an entirely different state, felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He called Ethan immediately. "Where are you right now?" Ethan, not a convincing liar, stammered, "In a meeting." "A meeting this late?" Ethan suddenly remembered the time difference. The location he'd claimed to be in was 3 hours ahead. It would be 3 a.m. there. "Yeah, last-minute client crisis. Gotta go, bye." He hung up, a strange sense of panic rising in him. "We're not skiing," he told Leo. "I have to go back." Now, on the other end of the line, Julian felt the icy chill of the ski slopes transmit through the phone. He slowly lowered the receiver and made another call. "The blueprints I gave you. Is it finished?" "Yes, Mr. Thorne. You can pick it up tomorrow." When Ethan landed, he rushed to Julian's penthouse. He opened the door and stopped dead. In the center of the living room, several workers were assembling a massive, ornate birdcage, easily 10 feet high and just as wide. Julian's getting birds? He wondered aloud. A whole flock of them by the looks of it. Tucked beside the scattered parts was a specifications sheet. He glanced at it and saw the words 24-karat gold plating. This wasn't for birds. A memory surfaced, the old photo, the story his mother had told him. The two cages, separated by 2 decades, were nearly identical in design. Had Julian remembered, and was this some kind of elaborate revenge for years of reputational damage? Just then, the door opened and Julian walked in, stopping short when he saw Ethan. "You're back early." Ethan saw the storm in Julian's eyes and felt a surge of panic. Julian dismissed the workers, and the moment the door closed, Ethan rushed to apologize. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, we were just kids." Julian's laugh was cold. "Do you think you're still 4, Ethan? Do you think love is a game where you bear no responsibility?" He swept Ethan into his arms and tossed him into the birdcage, onto a pile of velvet cushions. The golden door clanged shut. Ethan scrambled to the bars, his mind racing. He knew this wasn't about the childhood incident. This was about something else, something bigger. He summoned his most pathetic expression. "Julian, brother, I was wrong." The childhood term, meant to be endearing, landed like gasoline on a fire. Julian's face contorted with a pain so deep it shocked Ethan. He didn't understand. This was just a nickname. Julian knelt, his forehead pressed against the bars opposite Ethan's. "I don't want to do this to you," he rasped, his voice raw. "Just let me cool down." He wanted Ethan to be free, but he couldn't bear the thought of him flying away. He pressed a key into Ethan's hand. "If you're truly sorry, you can let yourself out." Then he turned and walked to his bedroom, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The moment he was gone, Ethan unlocked the door. He understood nothing, but he knew he had to fix it. An idea sparked and he ran out of the apartment. He spent the next 6 hours with a lawyer friend who was an expert in felting, painstakingly creating a tiny, perfect replica of his toddler self in the frilly outfit, a project that left his fingers raw and blistered. He then bought a small, intricately carved wooden birdcage, placed the felt doll inside, and had his friend seal the door permanently. He raced back to the apartment, his heart pounding. He found Julian standing in the darkened living room, a suitcase by his side. It looked like he was leaving. The sight of Ethan, his face flushed with exertion and his eyes bright with unshed tears, stopped Julian in his tracks. Why could this man look so innocent after causing so much pain? "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered, holding out the small cage. "I went to get you an apology gift. He can serve my sentence for me. I'm out here, but I've locked my heart in there with him. There's no key." The carefully constructed walls around Julian's heart crumbled into dust. He swept Ethan into his arms, crushing him against his chest. He saw the old photograph Ethan had used as a model. Is this the photo that ruined your reputation? Ethan finished, his voice muffled against Julian's shirt. Does it matter? Aren't I your husband now, 20 years later? He felt a wave of indignation. I thought the golden cage was a gift for me because I've always loved them. But it was just to punish me. It is for you, Julian said quickly. Ethan pulled back, his eyes wet. I don't believe you. To make this, my fingers are all blistered. He held out his hand, showing the small, angry red marks on his fingertips. The sight filled Julian with a fresh wave of guilt. I was wrong, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. Whatever punishment you want, I'll accept it. Fine, Ethan said, a sly look entering his eyes. Then you get in the cage and feel what it's like. He pushed Julian inside, took the key, and locked the door from the outside. Julian watched him, a slow smile spreading across his face. Are you sure about this? He gripped two of the golden bars and, with a grunt of effort, bent them far enough apart to step through. Ethan stared, dumbfounded. How? Two of the bars are solid gold, Julian explained, stalking toward him. The rest are hardened alloy. A contingency. A back door I left for you just in case. He scooped Ethan up. But you just locked yourself in. Thrown onto the bed, Ethan sputtered. You're so cheap. Only two solid gold bars. I bet you were planning on a cheap alloy ring for the proposal, too. Julian's response was to silence him with a kiss that left no room for argument or air. The next day, Ethan woke up sore and alone. On Julian's laptop, left open on the coffee table, he saw a familiar thumbnail. It was the picture Melissa had taken at the ski resort. The fury returned not just about the photo, but about the implication. Julian had him followed. He dressed, wincing, and stormed out, heading straight back to his mother's house. He was limping when he arrived. Did you and Julian get into a fight? His mother asked, concerned. No, I just slipped on some ice on my way over, he lied, unwilling to explain the real reason for his stiffness. A short while later, the doorbell rang. It was Julian, his arms laden with gifts, followed by a train of assistants also carrying bags. It was a formal, elaborate apology. He explained to Ethan's mother that there had been a misunderstanding. When he entered Ethan's room, he found him lying face down on the bed. Are you still hurting? Julian asked, his voice soft with concern as he saw the angry bruises on Ethan's backside. Ethan seized the opportunity. He turned, his eyes wide and glistening with manufactured tears. I told you to stop, but you wouldn't listen, he whimpered. Julian's heart twisted. Had he been that rough? He began to apologize, promising to be more gentle, to sleep in the guest room if he ever heard him again. Ethan pressed his advantage, demanding a contract limiting their activities to twice a week. Just as Julian was about to reluctantly agree, Ethan's mother bustled in with a warm, boiled egg. Here for his fall, she said cheerfully. He took a nasty spill on the ice patch outside your building. The truth hung in the air. Ethan pulled the covers over his head in shame. Julian looked from the egg to the bed, and then back again, a slow understanding dawning on his face. Later that night, after a trip to the hospital confirmed no serious injuries from the fall, Julian carried Ethan home on his back. Next time, he murmured, his voice gentle but firm, please just talk to me first. Don't run away. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks exploded over the river, painting the sky in shimmering gold and crimson, Julian went down on one knee. He opened a small velvet box, revealing two simple, elegant platinum rings. Ethan, marry me. He then produced another document from his pocket. a certificate of authenticity, verifying the purity of the metal. "They're not alloy," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Ethan laughed, tears finally spilling over. He snatched a ring and put it on. "I like alloy," he declared. "The stronger." Julian slid the other ring onto his own finger. "There's something else in the box." Inside was a delicate silver chain with two small, linked rings. Julian knelt again, fastened it around Ethan's ankle, and kissed the fine bones of his foot. The larger ring was for him, the smaller, gem-studded one a miniature of his own. "This is beautiful," Ethan said, admiring it. "What is it?" "An anklet," Julian replied, his eyes dark and possessive. "You are never to take it off." A year later, Leo bought a pair of parakeets. Ethan was visiting and noticed the small bands on their legs, one around the ankle, the other for tethering to a perch. The design was identical to his anklet. He looked down at his own ankle, then back at the birds, and the realization dawned. He had been tagged. He stormed home to confront Julian, who met his accusations without a shred of guilt. "Did you want the larger version?" he asked calmly. Ethan immediately fell silent, protectively covering his ankle with his other foot. No, he decided. He did not. This one was just fine.